Brothers, I hope that all of you have read the article by Rastus Jones concerning the various proofs of God. He provides, I believe, 7 different proofs and 7 different definitions of who God is. I think the definitions are very important. Remember what Srila Prabhupada had said about our goal in religion. Our goal in religion is to understand who God is and love Him. Yes, so this is Prabhupada's definition of what we should be doing. Now, if you're just getting into continence, just getting into the no masturbation zone, you're very high testosterone or whatever it is that makes you feel very high flying and superior and in great health. But you might not yet start to have a sense that there is a spiritually controlled world outside of you, and that the very essence of the world outside of you is consciousness, and therefore the world inside of you, in your conscious state, is much more primary and much more important and much more vast. Now, I would just like to discuss one of these definitions, and this definition is the creation definition of God. That is, that God is the creator. The creator. Now, we are syncretists here at the KBH. That means that we do not discriminate against anyone of any true religion. That means that you can come from any type of faith or background, cultural background, and you might be taking any various number of paths in religion or even science. We can encapsulate the world as being a mix of material and spiritual, or matter and energy. The science world likes to say matter and energy. And energy is perhaps a broader term which includes certain natural phenomena like lightning and light from a light bulb and things. When we're talking about energy, fine, I'll accept that word as well. There is that subtlety, you see. The subtlety is what makes energy more powerful usually. So we could not measure the energies in the body, the human body, until I believe the 1970s. And before that, people said it's not measurable. There is no electricity or energy in the human body because they didn't have a machine to measure it. That's kind of silly, and I think the stuff that we can measure is probably not the most important stuff also. The more subtle it is, the more powerful it is. That's the law in the spiritual world. In any case, we're syncretist. So I'm not out here to try to prove the Christian God and that Jesus Christ should be your Savior, or that you should bow down to Krishna or to Lord Buddha or whatever it is. It's not about that. These proofs are proof of higher intelligence, greater consciousness. There's also the forest and the trees issue. The forest being, there are many aspects, there are many parts which can be considered as a whole, right? So if you're more of a Christian and you just say God is one, there's just one God, or you're a Catholic and you talk about the 3 aspects of God, it's the Trinity. Then you go to Hinduism and there's like 500, right? And they talk about all these aspects. But then they also still talk about God in Hinduism as well. And so we're not out to prove any one of these particular religious traditions. That's not the point. What we're here to prove is very basic. And this is what the ontological argument for God, which has never been disproven, which is logically solid, which remains there in the universities long after communism is mostly dead and a lot of other ideas have come and gone. The ontological argument is still there. And what is that argument? If something comes into being, then that means that it was created, and therefore there must be a creator or creators forests, trees, doesn't matter. Something comes into being, and then something puts that into motion, puts that into being. On our level, we're at a very low level of consciousness, so we create things on a small level. For example, this is a piece that I have a book of compositions for classical guitar, and that's an example of human creation. We can do things like symphonies. We can sew up our shirts, make beautiful clothes. We can write books and novels. There's a lot of fantastic creations that we can do in our own little world. However, I look at something like a plant, and humans are nowhere near creating stuff like this. We're talking about a difference of billions and trillions of times of degrees to get us to that kind of a level. And I think the absurdity is if you're an atheist and you reject the ontological argument, then you're faced with the proposition that humankind, or even you yourself, whatever atheist you are, is the highest form of intelligence in the universe. And I find that hard to believe. Just looking at plants, even slugs, or animals, or ants, even small ones, the level of creative power in those things is very high. How do we define a thing, and how do we define that it has come into being? I think when we define a thing, we define it as something that has come into being, and after it has come into being, it begins to have a function. So there's a factory that produces my cell phone, and there are many people that work there. There's your forest, right? And we might see the forest as a bunch of trees, all the workers, the inventors, even the businessmen, the salespeople. But then as a whole, they are this company called Samsung, and they are driving the agents and the people who sell this. And when I get it, it comes into being. When I hit that power button, it turns on, and I make my first call, write my first message, do these first things. These are the functions. So it's these special functions that define that this thing has come into being, and it is in fact designed to do these functions. It cannot randomly perform these functions. These functions are difficult to perform. They require thousands, if not millions, of things in a complete process, and then all those things working together form a tool which works to serve a specific end. And this is why we know things are designed and they aren't evolved. And evolution, sounds nice because it sounds like progress, and they're just using a word that means progress, but that's not what they really mean. They use evolution to define two processes, which is mutation and selection. Neither of these processes produce anything. This is the central problem with evolution theory, as something posited as a cause of things existing that have functions, like animals, plants. You can't explain how these things began to have useful functions by saying they lost material, like in most mutations. Some mutations are perhaps neutral. They might change a gene here and there and change what things are done. Usually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's genes being missing, like these muscular bulls in Belgium are missing genes to block muscle growth, and tulips in Holland, they pull genes out to make different colors. Dogs, as opposed to wolves, have maybe lost some material. I don't know, but even they say scientifically you can't tell the difference genetically between dogs and wolves, as last time I read about it, which tells us about the level of science today is not very high, because obviously a Chihuahua and a wolf are very, very different animals. So we wear our genes, and our genes do not wear us. Now, creation, it's just that simple. I see something, there are some things I see and I don't know who made it, but we know that intelligence created it. Now, is this really, really high intelligence? No, it's the level of human intelligence, so I say humans created this. But when we turn over to a biological life, and I know that humans did not create this, and how do I know it's created? Because it has a function. Because it has many, many practical functions, which are very complex, beautiful, interesting, and wonderful. And this is the power of God. Now, if you're reeling at the idea, oh, God, I don't like that word. You don't have to say that word. There's a lot of other words. But we are syncretists at the KBH. We have a introductory video for that. It's called All Religions. It means all true religions are one. And we're all using different words to describe different practices. And that's the real root of religion, is practice. That's why at the KBH, also at the BSW, we preach first and foremost celibacy. Celibacy is the precondition to understanding what's going on around you and to turn yourself up to the light and the spiritual aspect of the universe. If your head and your face are in the gutter, you're not going to see this stuff, you won't comprehend it, and you won't see the world in that way, and it's not difficult to understand why, for example, a wanker will not understand a lot of very basic common life problems, and he suffers in bad health, and he suffers in bad luck and poverty because of his behavior and his blindness. And Jesus freed him of the blindness through his chastity. Jesus in his white vegan clothes, pure organic cotton and grass sandals, natural hair, and the white clothes represent the chastity, the purity of the Christian movement and what is preached in Christianity. And so that's it. We know that God exists, or you could say gods, or much higher intelligence, energies, even electromagnetic bubbles. Eric Hufschmidt is an atheist, but he says electromagnetic bubbles. Well, what are those? Are these electromagnetic bubbles that, for example, control the growth of a plant, are they of higher or lower intelligence than a human? Well, obviously they're much higher than a human, much higher. I would have trouble making that guitar back there, so that's about where my level is at. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. That is the one of the definitions of God. Maybe for later installments we'll talk more about the inner sound, Om, that is also God. The inner light, Jyoti, that is also God, and so on and so forth. Thanks for your listening. Om. Testosterone, or whatever it is that makes you feel very high flying and superior and in great health. But you might not yet start to have a sense that there is a spiritually controlled world outside of you, and that the very essence of the world outside of you is consciousness, and therefore the world inside of you, in your conscious state, is much more primary definitions of who God is. I think the definitions are very important. Remember what Srila Prabhupada had said about our goal in religion. Our goal in religion is to understand who God is. Om, brothers. I hope that all of you have read the article by Rastus Jones concerning the various proofs of God. He provides, I believe, 7 different proofs and 7 different definitions, and love him. Yes, so this is Prabhupada's definition of what we should be doing. Now, if you're just getting into continence, just getting into the no masturbation zone, you're very high,